I'm gonna go on record as saying, not only, Jennifer Davis, do I think that you have the skill to do whatever it is that you set your mind to. I've watched you overcome certain things that maybe you thought at one point you couldn't, and then just decided to overcome anyway. Use those as examples in business, right? Never let anybody tell you you cannot. You are not a woman that I put in that column of I'm going to be told what I can do and how I can do it. So just recognize that people who say that to you in life or in business, I think you've pushed past it in life. Just push past it in business because it's the exact same thing. You
I
can
appreciate
do it.
that.
As a matter of
Thank you.
fact, my expectation is that by the end of July, you'll have your first $1 million listing. So go work on that.
I'm gonna go for it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think stuff, saying something like that is so important because we tend to believe that the negatives, more quickly, I think, than the positives. Like, you mean me? I can do that. And when people say something negative, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, and it's the, one of the keys to success in your own life is to surround yourself with people who believe in you and will support you and lift you, right? And it's finding your way to those people, um, and then just sticking with those people who lift you up. I
Yeah.
love that.
Like
And
that.
that's why I asked the question, because it does tend to seem that certain agents or people, like, they have they selling the same, caliber of homes or whatever. And that's what I'm saying. There really isn't a difference. It's in your head more than it is.
And if I could just share one more thing on it, this is kind of something, a life lesson that I learned a long time ago. All that stuff that's in your head, it's all made up. It's all made up by us. So, since we know it's all made up, why don't we make up a story where we are the winner? Why are we making up these bad stories?
Make up a different story.
Make up a different story where you are on top. You're the superhero. I got to tell you, I do that every morning. I just do.
Mm-hmm. No, it's so true. It's so true. I love it. All right.
So I have a question about buyers, Rick.
Yes, ma'am.
So last year I had more sellers. This year seems as though all I have is buyers. Now, what I would like to do, because I realize it's starting to bring me down, I live in North Haven now. So I've been driving to Bridgeport and Waterbury and Stamford, and I realize now I'm on the verge of jumping off a building. So I want to disperse my buyers to other agents, but make money off of that at the same time. One agent told me I should do referrals. Another agent told me I could have showing agents where they show properties and I do the rest. And I get a higher split. I kind of like that one better.
Yeah. So the showing assistant idea is this, and so this works for anyone who's kind of geographically challenged with where their leads are, right? A showing assistant can work. This can also work as you continue to grow your business, if in fact the time in the car with the buyers starts to just get over the amount of time that you really want to be spending, and detracting from your ability to continue to list and do the rest of the work. So it's growth either way, either geographically or from a scaling perspective. And that model looks like you find somebody talented in each of those specific areas. You meet the new buyer with that showing agent. And so let's just create an example. So say Jen, I was your showing agent for Waterbury, right? That's kind of where I live. It's kind of where I have a specialty. It's easy for me to kind of jump up and show in Waterbury, maybe even into Naugatuck and Wolcott and all those kind of surrounding towns. And so you get into a relationship with me as your showing assistant, And we have an agreement. The agreement the agreement outlines exactly what I do and exactly what you do. And the way this works the best in a showing assistant arrangement is you and I. So now Ronnie comes to the table as a buyer. We both meet with her for the consult, which can be done via Zoom. Again, if especially if you're doing this from a geography perspective, you can certainly continue to do it via Zoom. We both meet with her during the consult, and it's explained to the buyer exactly how this works. So, Mrs. Buyer, as the lead agent, it is my job. As the showing agent, it is Rick's job to locate and show you all the properties that meet your criteria. You'll be hearing directly from him. You'll be scheduling all your appointments with him. Once you find that house that you want to make a move on as the lead agent, it is now my job to secure that property for you. So Rick shows you all the houses. I then go ahead and negotiate that to a close and push you forward to make sure you get to the closing table. Any questions on that? No? Great. And so then it's like fly be free. And then I go out with the buyer and do all that kind of showing work. And then as soon as there's a house that the buyer wants to buy, push it back to you as the lead agent. You then sweep on in, do your homework on the house, have the conversation, write the offer, present the offer, and kind of take it from there. And for that, we have an arrangement about how much I actually make. Right? There are lots of different versions of that, depending on the price point people are showing, depending on how busy you really are. Right? So if all I'm doing Monday through Monday is going out with buyers because you have this enormous pipeline of buyers that keeps me crazy busy, I may take less than if it's just the occasional, kind of one-off. I can't do this, so go and do that. What are those numbers? I don't know, anywhere from 20 to 50% of the commission, depending on a bunch of different factors and the agreement that you have with the showing agent.
What would some of the factors be, Rick?
I think price points of what I would do in a scenario where I was looking to have somebody do this for me is I would take my previous year. I would project out like 12 months from now and kind of say, okay, well, what does my buyer world look like, and what is it going to look like? On average, I have X number of leads, and so if this person has a 75% conversion rate with buyers, and I give them, let's keep the math easy, I give them 10 buyer leads and they convert 75% of them, well, they'll have 8 closings. And if my average sale price is X, that means every time we close a piece of business, we'll earn, I don't know, again, let's keep the math easy, $10,000. And so at $10,000 times 8, that's $80,000. If we're on a 50-50 split on those, that's $40,000 for the buyer's agent, and then splits and taxes, right? So how much is that person putting in their pocket? If they, so 12, 28 taxes on that. So, it's about a 25 or so, 20 to 22 to $25,000 a year experience for the buyer's agent, for the showing agent. And so then I get to go and talk with talented people to say, this is what this looks like. Is this something that is of interest to you? Right? I then have to decide whether earning 40K gross makes sense for me or not. Does that help?
Helps. So you say try to find talented people. I was thinking, wondering, should I be using a newer agent or a seasoned agent?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I'll go back to finding talent, because talent to me does not necessarily only reside in experience, right? Talent will reside in someone who's newer to the business, someone who's kind of mid-tier, someone who's been around a while. There's lots of different versions of where that talent shows up. Is it someone who's newer to the business who I can then help kind of mentor along and kind of train up? Is that something I'm interested in doing and willing to do? And if so, the splits might be different, right? Because if I'm also going to create a mentorship around growing you, well, then you may make a little less in the beginning and kind of grow into something higher.
Yes, thank you, Rick. And one last question on that is, so if most of the properties are in Stamford, would you recommend I use one agent or one agent for each buyer, or a couple of different agents?
So another great question. Personally, I like an agent, as long as it's the right agent, right? And what I mean by that is you'll be able to get into business with someone who is more talented if there's more promise of income on the back end. And so if you're consolidating all of the Stamford-based leads with one agent who knows and works Stamford, well, there's more opportunity for that person. So more talented people would likely be attracted to what you were offering them than not.
Okay, thank you, Rick.
You're quite welcome. What else?
I was just going to comment on something with that, which may be something that you can do instead of getting into a contract right away with someone. Somebody from New York had offered to me, like if they had a client come here, if I would show them, they would give me something. So is that again, that's just a contract between two people to pay them just to do a showing, or maybe then, something that maybe you can do and then see if you actually like that person before you.
Yeah.
sign them up?
So here's what I would
does that work?
say is I'll answer that question and wrap back around to the showing conversation, just to put a period on the end of that sentence. What you've described sounds more like a kind of a one-off type thing where, either I'm not licensed in that state, so I'll pop them over to you or whatever.
Okay.
And that's
It's
just
like a one-time thing. Okay.
Yeah. So you have referral agreements in place for each client. Turning that back around to the showing assistant, I am not a big fan of one-off showings,
Okay.
right? If it's a one-off opportunity, like,
Yeah.
here's what I mean by that. One-off showing assistants, like when people say to me, well, I have showing assistants when I'm really busy, but then when I'm not, I do it all myself. Okay, well, that you're like trying to have your cake and eat it too, and there's no growth that comes from that. And frankly, without the consistency that the showing assistant has, you'll burn through showing assistants because they'll be like, okay, so wait, am I?
What am I? Yeah.
Why are you out with that person? Because now, like, I don't get it. I thought that was my world, and so I think making the decision that says this is the path I'm going down, right? So Jen's going to make a decision for my Stamford-based business. I'm going to have, Maria.
I got you.
My showing assistants, and then Maria gets all the buyers in that territory based on what they've agreed to. Or else what Jen runs into is struggle and resentment down the road because it feels like she's cherry picking the leads. Oh, well, it's an $800,000 buyer in Stamford. Well, I'll drive for that one, right? Why should you make the money when I can make the money, right? We have to be willing. So here's, I know I'm a little all over the place, but let me make this statement. When you decide to get into business with someone other than yourself, that person always needs to come first. You need to start making decisions in your business, not just based on how they affect you, but how they affect you and that other person. And when you make decisions about you, it's about you and your family, which means now when you make decisions in your business, when there's other people involved, it's about you and your family and that person and their family. And the challenge of leadership and growth is to make sure that you make decisions that put those people's needs before your own, so that everyone's growing together. If there's an inferior superior scenario, or I can't think of the word I'm missing. We'll use scenario. If it's that I'm better than you thing, that's not going to last very long, right? You always have to be thinking about this from a leadership perspective, and putting other people's needs first. Let me restate that, from a servant leadership perspective, right? That's what I meant to say. Because as a servant leader, you are called upon to look around the room and say, I'm now in business with these people. Their success has to matter more than mine, right? What does Zig Ziglar say? Spend your time helping everybody else get what they want, and guess what? Everything that you want just shows up. When you spend more of your time figuring out what's best for yourself and leaving the other people out, it doesn't work as well. And trust me, I've played both sides of that. And being keyed into what is better for the people I'm in business with has been far more lucrative for me personally than when I was thinking only about how it affected myself. Whew, there was a bunny trail.
But a good one.
Yeah. Those are those cool business and life lessons that you stumble over time and time again, that just show up, right? We didn't start there, but the business conversation kind of led us there, because they really are just truths. What else?
I have a question just on little details things. So if you're doing like a rental and the person gets the lease, is it the landlord's job to get them the keys? Is it the person who is your buyer? Are you supposed to get them the keys? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so I'll give you my answer to that. There may be a
Okay.
number of different answers on this call.
I'll take yours.
My answer to that is, in a rental scenario, the one thing that I don't do as the listing agent
Mhm.
is deliver the keys to the tenant. The one thing I would prefer not to be in charge of as the tenant's agent is delivering keys. Now, there are some scenarios where if the landlord is in California, well, then somebody has to take control of the keys. But if it's going to be the agents who are taking control of the keys, I prefer to have that in writing, very clearly stated. If that the landlord is kind of giving that to the listing agent to do, and if the listing agent then says, oh, you know what, go ahead and take the keys out of the lockbox and just hand them to the tenant, I would prefer not to do that. And if I'm going to do it, I want that direction given to me in writing by the listing agent, such that I have a record that you told me to go and hand those
Right.
keys.
So I guess the answer is, though, the landlord is supposed to be the one to give them the keys. Would that be
Again,
correct?
m-
In
my
your
answer,
opinion?
my answer to that is
Okay.
that is a landlord-tenant
I agree. Okay. You don't want to be you don't want to lose the keys and then be blamed or whatever the case may be. Okay. So I'll make sure the landlord.
And again, there are certain
Of
scenarios
course, there's exceptions. Mhm.
where
I'm
it's
just trying to
not
find out
physically
what
practical.
normally, 9 times out of 10 happens, or what's supposed to, or what's the best, like you say, what's the best
Yeah.
scenario so that nothing goes wrong.
I believe that's a best practice.
Okay.
Which is different than what happens 9 times out of 10. just
Okay.
Because 9 times out of 10, the agents are just kind of doing whatever with the
Right.
keys. I believe the best practice is
Okay.
have that be the landlord. If you're not the listing agent on the deal, it's hard to have influence over that, right? So then you get, because you also don't want to plant a flag in the,
Exactly.
this is not how I do this, and so
Right.
therefore we're gonna screw up the whole transaction.
Of
So
course.
it's a balancing act.
Okay.
Karen?
That part is still a little bit confusing to me, because in the past, especially in Darien, people say, hey, I'll just take the key, give it to them. In Stamford, I had 2 situations where this didn't work at all. And I think in retrospect, I told both agents, they were both buyer's agent, I told both agents to put the key back in the key box when they're done with the walkthrough. And I would meet the owners after the closing and hand them the key. And that neither one agreed with that, and they both messed it up.
Hmm.
So, you know, I had in one case, I had the buyer's agent go back to the house and put the key in the key box, get it back from the buyers. They hadn't closed yet. There were still some things that needed to be done. And so I had her put it in a lockbox, and you know, obviously I was the bad guy, but that's okay because I was not there for her. I was there for the right seller who specifically requested
Yeah.
that.
Let me say this about that. Um, when, so I am the bad guy in my life every single day. Don't 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 make that a thing, right? Somebody's got to be the bad guy, because that's kind of the way the world makes judgments, right? And that's just I'm the bad guy on your behalf every single day, right? You need to be the bad guy on behalf of your client, right? I look at you guys as my clients. You need to be the bad guy on behalf of your clients. Remember this: as the listing agency and the listing agent, you get to make the rules.
Mhm.
And so if in fact, I'm glad to hear that you were firm about, no, go put those keys back. I told you what to do, and I wasn't kidding. Now please go put them back before I call the police and
Oh,
let them know that you have stolen the keys
I
to the
didn't go that
house
far.
and
Oh,
given them to, well,
yes,
and I'm not saying that this should be a script, right?
yeah,
I'm kind of
Thinking.
playing out
you're
what could
taking
happen, right?
something that's not for you to take.
Exactly right.
I told her it's business. I'm just talking business. This is the agreement. I texted you specifically. You agreed to it at the time. You're not doing what you said you do or that we agreed on. On the other side, she did put she did leave the key in the key box, but they were there at the walkthrough for so long. One of the buyers went and had the key duplicated. Can you believe it?
Oh, God.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, I get there and they're already in there with the handyman and all that. I couldn't
Yeah.
believe it, but you know.
That's there's some, we live, here's what happens when you live someplace that treats real estate a little bit more casual, right? And the reality is we live and work in a place that treats this a little bit more casual than perhaps in other areas of the country, or even other areas in the tri-state area.
Mm.
And because there are many that have a bit of a casual attitude around what we do, um, I guarantee you the conversation, like they're having this same thing, this same Q&A with their broker, and the person that you had the disagreement with is saying, oh, when one time I had this woman who was this listing agent who was like a total key Nazi with the blah 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 blah, because in her mind she didn't do anything wrong. It's because that's in her casual world, and her world is supported by casual people, not saying, you know what, here are the things that could happen. And so from a best practices, from a reduced risk perspective, what if we looked at it this way and made it a little less casual? I'm not going to say one's right and one's wrong. I think one's a best practice, and ultimately you need to follow the lawful instruction of the seller. And so if the seller has decided that they want to meet post closing and turn over the keys, well, then that's what we set up.
So what do you do representing the buyer now? And the selling agent said, well, once you have the walkthrough, just take the key and give it to them.
Yeah. So what I would say to the listing agent is, thank you so much. However, what I think I would prefer is that the keys make their way to the closing attorney, and the attorneys can pass the keys and get that. You know what? If somebody doesn't like it, blame me. Say, oh, you know what? I came to Keller Williams and it's all great except for this Rick Scott guy. He is like a hard ass, right? And unfortunately, that rule is, because if you don't, I'm okay with that, right? If you don't, if you get stuck in a situation, blame it on the broker,
Mhm.
right? Sorry, we don't touch keys in our brokerage. Please make sure they go through the attorneys.
Mhm.
Again, it is a best practice. Do our agents accept keys and hand keys to buyers all week long? A lot of them do. A lot of them don't. A lot of them do, right? And so I'm telling you what I think best practices are to reduce risk and cause less confusion and not have drama, right?
Okay, got it. Thank you.
What else?
Hey, Rick,
Yes,
Uh,
Diane.
in a rental situation, there's the certified check for the 2 months deposit, and then there's the certified check for the first month's rent. Where does I guess the deposit to or the security deposit gets made out to the landlord, and the other check goes where?
Great question. So the answer is, it depends. If we are the listing agency, I believe best practices and what I'll answer each and every time is, if the landlord is in agreement and we are the listing agency, the check for the security gets paid directly to the landlord, and the check for the first month's rent gets paid to Keller Williams Realty, and then we will simply use that first month to pay the brokers, right? That's when you are on the listing side, again, you get to make that determination. You have control over that, you and the landlord. And if the landlord, now there are some landlords that even though you are the listing agency and that's the path that you prefer, there are some landlords who say, no, I don't want to do that. I want everything to come to me, and then you send me an invoice and I will pay you, right? If that's what the landlord is looking for, it's kind of a pain because, now it's an extra step or two, and yet they have that right to ask for that. If you're on the tenant's side, the answer is the listing agency gets to make that determination, because the landlord and the listing agent are going to have a conversation around how they want to see that. So if you represent a tenant, before you just go and do it the way that you do it when you're the listing agent, I would ask a question. Hey, I'm curious, Donna, as the listing agency on this, how is it that you guys process security and first months? I can tell you that how we do it is that the way you'd like it done. And maybe Donna says, oh, before you tell me how you do it, we have a very specific system on that. Here's how that's going to look. Or the landlord has asked that it be done this way. So I would just ask that question when you are the tenant's agent. And if the answer is, inconclusive, or they don't really have an answer, then I would certainly say to Donna, well, so here's the way we do it. I'm just going, if it's all right with you, I'll have it processed that way. We'll have the security written to the landlord directly, and the first month's rent written to your brokerage as trustee, because presumably you're then going to use that money to pay both brokers. Does that work?
Yeah,
Does that help?
Yeah.
I have a question to that.
Yes, ma'am.
Sometimes the listing agencies do not want to collect the first month rent, and they require it to be written to the landlord as well. What would you say to that?
I would say the listing agency gets to make the rules. And when it's your tenant, you say, okay, and you go back to the tenant and say, here's how this listing agency in combination with this landlord are running this. And the tenant might say, well, that's different than the last time we did. And you got to say, yep, that's correct.
I know,
Right.
people will say
I had
that.
a question on that. I forgot who asked the first question, but she said it was a certified check. Does it have to be a certified check, or?
It does not have to be a certified check.
Okay.
Again, the listing agency will make those rules. If the
Okay, that's
listing
what I was
agency requests certified funds, then the tenants should go ahead and get those certified funds. If they don't, then personal checks can be utilized. And oh, by the way, when we are the listing agency, or every once in a while, the listing agency isn't equipped to handle escrow funds. And so I've had agents come to me and say, I'm doing a rental and it's with some little mom and pop, nobody in the middle of nowhere, and they're just not equipped. They've asked if we could hold the escrow funds. The answer to those kinds of questions is always yes, right? I know we don't hold escrow anymore, right? We push it to the attorneys, but rentals are the exception.
Oh.
And the other exception to that rule is any time where there's a scenario where it makes it simpler for the clients to push forward and get to a closing table, right? So our rules about pushing escrow monies to attorneys are not absolute, right? If you have a scenario where someone's asked us to do it because they couldn't or wouldn't or whatever, like don't fight that. Come back, let your MCA know, here's the scenario. And I've heard Rick say that in certain scenarios where it moves the transaction forward, that we would hold it, and they'll happily accept that. We still have our escrow accounts, right? And we have them because we want to make sure that they're available if you guys need them to move transactions forward. Does that answer that question? Yeah, Silva.
Thank you. I just experienced this now with these checks. It is a buyer's transaction. I am representing the buyer, and all of a sudden, my attorney, who represents the buyer, is asking the 4% on contract check to be mailed to the attorney, which means that we're completely releasing the funds to the seller's attorney before we are even in a secured outcome of this, because we're still dealing with building inspections. I mean, from my perspective, my question is, I see like my attorney is not protecting the funds, but am I overdoing it, overthinking it?
You are, and you are because, well, you may not be overthinking it. You may be, you just may be misinterpreting the scenario, right? And because there are rules around escrow, right? Attorneys, escrow to escrow, and we do hear that all the time. Well, we don't want it to be in the other party's attorney's escrow fund. Guys, the rules around escrow say that once money is in escrow, regardless of whose escrow account it is, it can only be released by one of two ways: either agreement of the parties or order of the court. And so if there's an agreement of the parties that the transaction is going to be terminated, right? Well, that's an opportunity for the seller's attorney to then release those funds. Just because it's in the seller's attorney's escrow account doesn't mean it's more at risk than if it's in the buyer's attorney's escrow account. I can give you situation after situation where we personally were holding the funds and the transaction fell apart and there was a dispute around the funds, and our own clients kept coming back to us saying, I don't understand, it's right in your bank account, why can't you just write me these funds? Like, because there are laws around escrow, and the law says agreement of the parties. Do you have an agreement? Well, no, the transaction fell apart, right? A closing is an agreement, right? Because when you get to a closing, you've now had an agreement of the parties with a contract that's now been finalized. So you either have something in writing that says we're closing, or both parties agree to release these funds this way, or there's an order of the court. The court orders me to pay it to this person, or a piece to each. Other than that, the money gets to sit there, grow whiskers and grow old until one of those two things happen. I've already held escrow money for upwards of almost 3 years while they fought about it and sued each other and all that stuff.
I have another question to that respect. It's a different case. My buyer all of a sudden decided that he is not buying the house anymore. And he had not deposited anything into any escrow. And I asked the attorney, is my buyer protected without giving any explanation, just rescinding the offer? Can the seller's attorney ask for some money? And my attorney said no. So in my mind, again, there is something that it wasn't done properly, or it is, and I'm overthinking it again.
Well, I guess maybe I'm unclear about all the facts of that situation.
Right before signing the contract, my buyer decided that he's not signing contract. He had not deposited any money. And I asked my attorney, I said, do we just say, hey, the buyer rescinds and that's it without any explanation? And is the seller's not going to ask for any deposit money, and my attorney said, no, there is no deposit, they cannot ask for anything. It was kind of like not quite clear answer to me.
So was there money in escrow or not?
No, but what
Okay,
if
well,
it was?
so if there was no money in escrow, well, then it's a moot point, right? Because whether there should have been or not is kind of irrelevant at this point because there wasn't, right? So if there was money in escrow, if there's no money to fight over, then there's no money to fight over.
But then it seems like it is important to have money in escrow.
Well, I would agree that it is, and I think it's part of the listing agent's job and the buyer's agent's job to make sure all the monies are going where they're supposed to go, and the checks have been written, and everything's where it's supposed to be, to make sure that there's some level of I don't even really consider it protection. I just consider it, following the offer that you wrote, right? Your offer said you're giving this much up front and then this much later on. If those monies are not delivered, and something goes sideways where the seller could ask for money to be held and the money's not there, well, then you have just an even bigger problem. I think what you're describing, Silva, is someone who maybe behaves a little more casual than we would like them to behave, right? The process is in place for a reason. And if all of a sudden one of the parties involved decides that the process isn't important and gets real casual around it, well, a lot of things could break down moving forward. I would be the guy saying, wait a minute, where's the check that was supposed to be written upon the acceptance of the offer, right? Where is that check? And if no offer was accepted in writing, well, that's one thing. But if something was done in writing and you were replacing that, whatever is in writing, with another contract, right, as often happens, there should have been on the offer to purchase or the purchase agreement some amount of money that was supposed to be written to wherever it was supposed to be written to, which again is outlined in that agreement that both parties signed to. So if that
The thing is that this is one of the cases where everything happened so quickly that we decided that the buyer is going to put the 10% straight to attorney, not the 1% plus 9%.
Yeah.
And now the attorney made it sound like, okay, so there is no money in escrow, so that's fine. Well, then what if there was money in the escrow? Is it still fine to just rescind the offer and not expect to be fined for that without any explanation?
It depends. So let's be clear. The buyers have no obligation to give a reason for termination, right? I purchased something about a month and a half ago, and 4 days later, for the very first time in my entire life, decided, you know what, I think I made a mistake on that one. And so I was within I wrote it on a 4-page contract, which had no mortgage contingency and no inspection contingency. So I was out of contingencies, except I reserved my right for a 5 business day attorney review period. And so I had the offer accepted on Saturday. On Monday or Tuesday morning, I let the listing agent know that, unfortunately, after attorney review, we are not going to proceed with this particular contract. Please, I'm sending a termination of contract agreement. Please have the seller sign it. And we just moved on, right? It wasn't like, oh, I woke up and the roof was not that. People aren't entitled to explanations, and oftentimes the only time they're entitled to an explanation is if you're utilizing a certain contingency to get out of a contract, right? If you're utilizing a mortgage contingency, well then you get to wave your hand and say, okay, well, we didn't get the mortgage, and so therefore we're exiting the contract because we had this mortgage contingency that said we could if this happened and this happened, right? But if you're utilizing something as generic as the 5-day attorney review period, there was nothing necessary. And you know what? The listing agent didn't ask. She didn't care. She's like, all right, well, sorry about that. If you change your mind, let me know. And on we went, right? It went back on the market. I went and bought something else. Everyone was happy.
Do you know that I didn't know about this 5-day attorney review?
So the 5-day attorney review period is only relevant if you're utilizing the 4-page standardized contract, right? It's paragraph 8, I think, of the 4-page standardized contract. It does not exist in offers to purchase, and it does not exist on a purchase agreement, right? But if you're writing things up and having people sign the 4-page standard real estate contract as found on the MLS, paragraph 8 does give a 5 business day attorney review period to all parties.
So
Not
I
just the
totally
buyer,
learned
all
something
parties.
new today. Wow.
Yes, Karen.
Okay, so I once had a situation where I gave a listing presentation, everything was hunky-dory, we signed the agreement. The next day, the guy walks into the brokerage and says, nope, I've changed my mind. I have 3 days to rescind the contract. I don't want to put my house on the market. I've decided I'm gonna interview more agents. And I said, no, this is it. We have a contract. He said, no. I said, if you read this contract, we can read it together. There is no place where it says we have time to change our minds. I answered all your questions. We sat for an hour. We're moving forward. And he made a big stink about it. And finally he said, well, all right, I don't want to get an attorney involved. We'll go for it.
I will tell you that here's what that person was referring to, right? There is a 3-day right of rescission, a contractual 3-day right of rescission in many states for many types of contracts. In the state of Connecticut, the 3-day right of rescission rule only applies, and I have to read this to you because I don't know them by heart. The 3-day right of rescission rule by law must be included in contracts surrounding health club memberships,
Oh,
timeshares,
nice.
home improvement contracts, and dating services.
Oh, nice.
Those are the 4 things.
Okay.
If you have a contract around that, there's a 3-day right of rescission. Our listing agreement is none of those things.
But it
right?
usually, it says that in the contract.
Yeah,
Yes.
it
we
will
don't
it will
have
say
that.
it. But here's why I mentioned this to you, because there are people who think that 3-day rights of rescission contractually are just across the board legal everywhere and for every contract. That is not. Now there might be some states where real estate contracts fall into that category. Connecticut is not one of them, right? Only those 4 things: health clubs, timeshares, home improvement contracts, and dating service contracts must include a 3-day right of rescission.
I love it. Yeah.
For
I will
everything
use
else, it does not exist.
I mean, it only happened to me once, but it was nail biting for 2 days.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. And people who think that they're right about that kind of thing, boy, do they think they're right. Like they are going to pound their chest until you say yes, but they're not. Unfortunately,
Well,
they're incorrect about that.
Yeah, he was difficult.
Yeah.
But anyway,
What else, Lenka?
good to know.
Hi, Rick. I actually always wondered, and I would like to hear your input on it. I've spoken to numerous attorneys about this as well, and I wonder how legally binding the purchase agreements we're writing, and I'm referring to the Keller Williams purchase agreement, or really the purchase agreement form that I'm getting off of the MLS. How legally binding are they? Buyers continue to ask, attorneys keep brushing me off, saying there's absolutely no legality to it. Buyers have nothing to protect them, neither do the sellers. Why do we even do it then? And back to the 1%, I kind of like Silva's point, and I've been on both sides. What does really happen when the 1% somehow, despite me as an agent making sure that my buyers are informed and understand that 1% needs to get to the escrow account somewhere, what if ultimately it doesn't? And I've had that situation happen where the listing agent, after my buyers changed their mind, went after that 1%, and it was in fact never deposited. And for a while, it looked like I breached some rules.
So depending on, so I'm going to answer the first question first and the second question second. So
Sure.
the first question, how legally binding is a purchase agreement? How many attorneys exist in the state of Connecticut? Because if there's 10,000 of them, there's probably 10,003 different opinions about the question you just asked.
I agree.
Right. And so my answer is this. If one should never, I don't use that word very often, never, right? However, I will use it here. One should never assume that something is locked up. One should never have their buyers or their sellers assume that something is locked up just because somebody signed something, right? So what assurances do people have? At the end of the day, people don't really have assurances other than knowing that they have the courts available to them. And what I mean by that is people can do whatever it is they choose to do, and then what the other part, and so in a scenario where the seller and the buyer have signed some contract, whether it's a purchase agreement or a 4-page contract or an actual attorney written contract with riders and whatever, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks later somebody decides to breach that and walk away, regardless of who spent money or who's given notification of termination of lease, so who's going to be homeless, all those kinds of things. People do those kinds of things all the time, right? What we can't get hung up on is they can or they cannot, right? Where I find that we as agents get stuck is either we've made representations to the clients that these things can't happen, right? And then when they do happen, we're like, oh my goodness, I told them this couldn't happen. So the first thing I would say is don't make promises that you have no control over. The second thing is always recognize that anyone can do anything at any time. And so in a scenario where you represent a buyer and now they're in contract and it's 2 weeks later and they've spent money and they've done this, they've given notice to their lease that they're leaving, and all of a sudden the seller says, yeah, you know what, I've changed my mind now, I'm not going to sell the property.
Yeah.
Well, what happens, right? So how legally binding is that contract? The only real answer is how much are the buyers who are affected by that change willing to pursue some kind of remedy legally? Because if they have a full-blown contract or a 4-page contract or a purchase agreement, all of those things have language in them that make them legally binding. However, something's only as legally binding as the parties are willing to acknowledge the bindingness of it. And so what I mean by that is you have a purchase agreement that says this is a contract, everybody signed it, and the seller decides to dump your buyers and go with another offer. Legally, they've signed a contract. Now, are there contingencies a lot of times in the contract? Sure. Do most attorneys say things like, you know what, most sellers' attorneys say things like, oh, don't worry about it. You know, if you want to take the higher offer, go ahead. I'll handle you getting you out of the other thing. Yes, they absolutely do. Because they don't say those things because they're basing things on the law. They say those things because what they know is real is that their colleagues, just like them on the other side of things, if they were representing the buyer, aren't going to recommend that the buyer pursue some full-flung lawsuit for a specific performance of a document because they may not win, right? The law is always gray. And what a lot of us want from real estate is the black and the white.
Black and white, yeah.
And they can't do that. And that's just not the way it works. And it's not the way, not only business, but it's not the way life works, right? And it's frustrating, right? When you're like, I'm a black and white kind of thinker. It's either right or it's wrong, or it's in or it's out, or it's this or it's that. And as your broker, I have had to teach myself over 20 years how to always ask questions about the gray, because the law lives in the gray, not in the black or the white.
Okay, so the bottom line is anybody can sign anything and anybody can really get out of anything if they really want to.
For all intents and purposes, for the purposes of this conversation, you can't lay your life down on document that anybody signs in real estate, right? Because there's always going to be an attorney that says, I know you signed that, don't worry, I'll get you out of it. I have a way, I have a this, I have a that. I know the attorney on the other side. He or she is never going to encourage those buyers to pursue us in court. I know they won't. So you're good, right?
Yeah, it's really frustrating, especially because we're trained to make sure that that 1% gets deposited somewhere within 3 business days. And then you get to the attorney who is like, yeah, I don't really care. Just tell them to bring the 10%. And I don't care really where it is, when it is.
Yeah.
It's just like, and it's one thing we're telling to our clients and then completely different thing that their attorneys are telling to the same client. So in a way, it makes us look a little incompetent.
Well, it goes back to, if there's even one casual player in the whole scenario, everything kind of gets funky, because now you've got 3 of the 4 parties saying, no, this is how it should go, and you've got somebody over here saying, you know what, ignore them, who cares, who cares? And you're right, if somebody's looking around saying, okay, well, somebody doesn't know what's going on. Who is it? Which one doesn't know? Let me answer your second question. And then we're nearly out of time. And so what happens if those monies aren't solidly in place? I'll tell you, one of the reasons that we stopped accepting 1% deposit funds, the main reason we stopped doing it is because logistically, it was silly, right? Logistically, it was one of those things that, like, why are we doing this? Because people would always lose the checks that we sent to the attorneys and all this stuff. So that was the main reason we stopped. But the secondary reason we stopped is because when you're the one in the contract or on the offer to purchase or purchase agreement that gets written in as, okay, 1%, this $5,000 is going to go to the Keller Williams Realty trustee account. And I'm signing those documents, or you are signing those documents on behalf of the company saying, yes, this is the outline and this is what we're all agreeing to. There is some level of responsibility that if it doesn't make it there and then something goes sideways and the seller suddenly says, okay, hold those monies, and there's no monies, we certainly could be responsible for those monies. So we stepped out of that to say, yeah, you know what, I think someone else is going to be responsible for that. Whether an attorney thinks that they themselves will be responsible, again, there's probably a whole lot of different answers to that question.
Okay, thank you so much, Rick.
You're welcome, guys. I hope this was helpful. For those of you who are hanging out for Conquer Command, Joe, what is our topic today for Command?
I think we're cycled on to designs now. So, but it wasn't in the email, so I'm open for any questions people have on Command in general, because there was no formal announcement of it today. So.
Got it. Excellent. So designs and/or, kind of like what we just did for the last hour, Joe's doing open mic Q&A. I can tell you, Joe, keeps you on your toes when you don't know what's coming at you. It's fun.
Yeah.
So I do encourage you, stick around and learn more about the technology that helps you drive your business. Guys, thank you so much for your time. Joe, take it away. I've made you the host.
Awesome. Should I? Oh, I'm going to pause the recording here or stop the recording.